All right, we're going to jump in. If you're ready, say I'm ready. Okay, we are in week 2 of a series that we're calling Sent. And what we did in January is we did a series called Called. And in that series, we talked about something called formational calling. And what formational calling is, a calling that is on each and every person's life, whether you love Jesus or not. Jesus is calling to you, saying, here's what I've got for you. And that formational calling is that we all should be saved. We all should say yes and fall in love with Jesus. He's calling us to that. We all should be sanctified. That God is calling us to live a life that looks like we love Jesus. Not because we're trying to check boxes and look perfect, but because God is forming us and changing us and making us new inside of us. And so because of that, that's the process of sanctification or holiness. That is a call, a formational calling that God has on each and every person's life. Okay? When God changes us from the inside, the world is impacted by that. When we try to change ourselves to look like a good Christian, the world rejects Christianity because we're fake. They're like, you ain't what you say you are. But when the Lord is doing it in us, the world is drawn to it, okay? That's formational calling. The last piece of the formational calling is that we're called to be sent. That we're actually called to go. It's a calling from God on every single believer. So we are now doing a series on the third part of that formational calling, which is to be sent, right? What we have said week 1 is this: every follower of Jesus has a missional calling. Everybody say missional calling. Every follower of Jesus has a missional calling that is prepared for them by God. Whether you've been following Jesus for a day, for 10 years, for 50 years or more, there is a missional calling on your life to not just come to church and say, hey, how are you, and drink our coffee. But there's a call on our life on a daily basis to live out something that Jesus has for us. And here's the reality. Most of us have no idea what that is. And we have no idea how to live it out. And we don't know what to do with it. And if that's where you are, that doesn't make you a bad Christian. That makes you normal. Look at the person next to you and say, I'm normal. They don't believe you. They don't believe you. Nobody just believed you. I believe you. You're normal. Okay? I believe you. Okay, so everyone has this missional calling on their life, and this missional calling is something we should be seeking to find. Whether you're 10 years old, 5 years old, 15 years old, 25, 85, wherever you are in your life, God has a missional calling on you, and it's our job to search it out. And we've been doing that by looking at the person Moses. Moses is a person, you'll find him in the Old Testament. He shows up in the book of Exodus. And Moses is in Egypt. He's a Hebrew baby who became an Egyptian prince, basically, which is crazy. It's a whole story about how Moses was saved from death as a baby, and he ended up in Egyptian court. And over time, Moses realizes he's Hebrew. He ends up harming or killing or murdering an Egyptian, basically, soldier to protect a Hebrew Israelite, and they find out that he murdered him. He takes off for the desert. He ends up marrying a woman, and her name's Zipporah, and he lives out there. Now he's just a shepherd living. He's been out there for 40 years, and one day he's tending to his sheep, and he sees a burning bush on the side of the mountain. He's confused. He goes up to it. He finds God there, and God is now speaking to Moses because God has a plan to send him. And so just to catch you back up, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 9, it says this. This is God talking. And now the cry of the Israelite has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. He's talking to Moses. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses' response to that. In verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? It's an interesting phrase. Who am I? Right? I'm not qualified. I can't do what you're asking me to do. I'm not enough. I don't have enough skills. I don't have enough talents. I've got nothing here, God. Who am I? I'm a shepherd in a field. What are we doing here? And God's response in verse 12 was this, and God said, I will be with you. Everyone say that with me. I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. You see what happened? Moses is saying, God is saying to Moses, he's saying, hey, I knew you were going to come meet me at this burning bush, and guess what? I'm sending you, but just so we're clear, I also have mastery over the future of what will happen after I send you. I will be with you and in front of you. Someone needs to hear that this morning. Someone in this room needs to hear that God is with you and in front of you. Whatever you got going on in life, he is with you and in front of you. Someone needs to hear that. So every time we say, who am I? God's response is, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. I'll be with you. And how the story should go, notice I said should. How the story should go is Moses goes, you know what, God, you're right. You're with me. I'm not going by myself. I don't have to do this on my own. I got you, and you got all the power. So you know what? Send me. That is not what happens at all. Okay? Look at chapter 4, starting at verse 1. We're going to be in chapter 4 of Exodus today. In verse 1, it says this, Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? He said, who am I to go? He eventually says, well, what are they supposed to call you? What's your name? He gets into that. Now it's, what if I go and they don't believe me? Verse 2, then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? What is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Okay? This is the comedic part of the story. God is like, throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground. It turns into a snake. And that dude, remember he took off his shoes in the beginning because it was holy ground? This dude is barefoot running on this mountain trying to get away from this snake. Okay? Probably not quietly. In my head, Moses is screaming like a little girl. I'm not going to lie. That's how I see it. He took off running and the snake's back there moving around or whatever. I think if God had a sense of humor in that moment, he probably had the snake chase Moses for just a little bit. Right? Here's this moment where Moses has something in his hand. God tells him to throw it on the ground, and it turns into something else. What do you have in your hand? Why is Moses even carrying a staff? Well, it's because he's a shepherd. It's to herd the sheep. It's to maybe use as a weapon. It's also something he can hold on to as he's walking on rough terrain, right? Multiple purposes for this staff. But when he throws it on the ground, it turns into something else. What do you have in your hand? What are the things that are just part of you and the way you operate? What are the skills and abilities that you hold on to? What is the thing that looks like it's just for work? That God is saying to you something very different. See, in Moses' hand, it's a staff. In God's hand, it comes alive. Moses has to let go of something. Moses has all these excuses, all these reasons why he can't go, all these things, the reasons why it doesn't work. And God says, in your hand, you're right, it won't work. In your hand, you're not enough. You're right. Let it go and watch what God can do in his hand. It's a whole different ballgame when that happens. It goes on to say in verse 4 and 5, then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Now, I don't know how loud God had to shout that because Moses ran away. Okay? But he's saying to him, I need you to come back and I need you to reach out and grab the snake by the tail. As I was thinking about this moment and processing it in my mind, I couldn't help but think of the show Swamp People. Anybody ever watch Swamp People where they like catch alligators and stuff? It's on the History Channel. I'm not necessarily promoting it on a Sunday morning. It's just something I've seen. But they have this other version now where they catch snakes. And these dumb people respectfully if one of them is watching me. These dumb people, they go out with like overalls on and a t-shirt, and they're walking through grass that's like up above their knee, and they're just looking on the ground like, wonder if I can find a snake today. And then they find one, and they act like little children. They're like, I found a snake, and they start like dancing because now they're freaking out. The snake's like biting at them, and they're trying to figure out how to get around it to grab the tail to pull it out of the weeds so that one of them can jump on it if it's large enough and grab it by the mouth. Y'all, that's dumb. That's just dumb. And in this moment, if God is looking at Moses and he's like, hey, remember that was your staff? It's not your staff anymore, it's a snake. Why don't you grab it by the tail? Why don't you grab it by the tail? So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake and turned it back into a staff in his hand. This is an important moment. I don't know if you realize how important this moment is. So far, God has asked a lot of Moses. And Moses' response is, yeah, but. Yeah, but. Yeah, but. Yeah, but. In this moment, Moses doesn't say, well, who am I to pick up a snake? Or, did you see how far I ran, God? I'm not picking that thing up. He is obedient for the very first time. He reached and he picked up the snake and it turned back into a staff. Can you imagine the moment of seeing something, like if I dropped a staff and it turned into a snake and then I ran, I would be thinking to myself, did that staff really turn into a snake? Like maybe I threw the staff and then a snake came out. Maybe it's, like I would start to rationalize it because it makes no sense. But when he picks it up, it becomes a staff again. And I think in that moment, Moses goes, oh, man. This, said the Lord, is so that many may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Y'all, Moses had to let go of his fear in order to go where God was sending him. Moses had to let go of his fear in order to go where God is sending him. When we experience fear in our brain, there is something called a flight or fight response. Our brain says, kill the snake or run as far as you can from the snake, right? What our brain doesn't say is go towards the snake. Like it's okay, everything will be fine. In this moment, in this fight or flight response that cripples us from doing what God has for us, Moses overcame his fear for the very first time. This is a big moment for Moses. Can I tell you, respectfully, I think fear cripples a lot of us from doing what God has for us. I think fear cripples a lot of us. We think to ourselves like, I can't. That's scary. I don't like the way that makes me feel. I don't think I can do that. Who am I to ask that? And we're afraid of rejection. What if I ask and they say no? See, here's the thing. God is calling you to ask. God is not calling you to get. It's not about what comes from the other side. It's about being obedient to what God has for you. Say, I'm doing what God has for me, even if on the other end there's a no. You do it anyway because maybe God needs you to experience that no. But he's calling you in obedience to something else. This is a huge moment. Don't let fear cripple you. Don't let fear cripple you. Verses 6 and 7, then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand in his cloak, and when he took it out, his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. The word leprous in Hebrew means any real bad skin disease, right? So he put his hand in, and when he came out, his hand was probably flaky and dry and completely white as snow, okay? Based on Moses' response to the snake, we should see Moses right here go, what have you done? Or try to run away from his hand maybe, which would be wild, okay? But there should be like a fear response because that's how Moses responded the first time. But we don't see that. God then says, now put it back in your cloak. Moses put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. See, his work, his staff, God asked him to throw it on the ground. His body, his hand, God said, I can do whatever I want with that too. You want to know why? Because God is the one who gave you the ability to do the work that you do, and God is the one who gives you life and breath. And either way, what God is saying to Moses is, I know you're afraid, I know you got tons of questions, but let me just be real with you. I'm the God of the universe. I've got it. I've got you, I've got your profession, I got your sheep that are on the side of the hill because you came all the way up to see me. I've got it all. I've got Egypt, I've got Pharaoh, I've got it all because I'm the creator of all things. And if you will stop thinking about what you can't do and start looking me in the eyes of what I can do, man, I can change the world through you, Moses. And you're right. Who are you? You're a nobody. You're a nobody. In fact, he's not just a nobody, he's kind of an idiot. He makes a lot of poor decisions. And God says, but when I see you, you're a somebody to me, and you've got something in you that I can use for the kingdom. I see you, Moses. Let's do this together. For Moses, it's a hand. For God, it's his creation to use as he sees fit. Verse 9, but if they don't believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. He didn't say it'll become red. He didn't say it'll look like blood. It is blood. It is blood. Why? Because Moses, I've got you in your vocation and your profession. I've got you personally because I created you. But even if the people of God don't listen to what I've created, I will call out on creation to get their attention because I created the Nile. I created the pitcher that you put in the Nile to pull out the water. I created the water that's in the Nile. And P.S., blood was my idea. I created that too. Watch how I work in creation to get their attention. Y'all, we love God and we think of him as a friend and we want to serve him well, but never lose sight of how big this God is that we have given our lives to. He's huge and he sees you and he wants to encounter you, the creator of the universe and of all things, who can do whatever he wants, has chosen Moses, a shepherd, to carry out his next great move of God. 10 and 11, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant. Well, now, wait a minute. Okay. After God says, I created you, I created your vocation, and I created all creation, this is a great point for Moses to go, you're right, isn't it? Like, yes, you did. My bad. Let's go to Egypt. I told you he's an idiot. Okay? Just like the rest of us. He says this, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord, but I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Y'all, I can't do the talking thing. I can't do it. I'm not capable. God, why would you choose me? You know, like I got issues with the way I speak. We don't know if he was a stutterer. We don't know if he had a speech impediment. We don't know. There's something about the way Moses talks that he's like, I'm not comfortable doing this. Here's God's response. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Like, yeah. Like, first of all, Moses, I know how you speak because I'm the one who gave you your mouth. You weren't just born with a mouth. Mouths are my idea. Aren't you grateful God gave us mouths? Well, aren't you grateful God gave some of us mouths? I gave you a mouth. I gave you a tongue. I gave you the ability to speak. I could have made you mute. You could have been someone who couldn't speak. I allowed you to speak. That's me. I did that. And the whole time, Moses is just continuing to say, like, wait, I've got more reasons why not me. I've got more reasons why you can't use me. I got more reasons that it's not me. I've got more reasons. Let me continue to count them. And God's response every time, his response every time, you ready? Is I made you. I made you. Y'all, here's the truth. This is probably unfair, but I'm just going to say it. 97, 98% of the people in this room have absolutely no idea what God is calling them to. They have no idea what they're being sent to. They have no idea what their missional calling is. And God is saying in response to that, I made you. I made you exactly as you are, and I know you don't know what to do with that yet. But if you'll stop and just lean in to me, we can figure it out together. I made you. I made you. You don't have to have it all figured out. I made you. I made you, and I'm the one who will send you. Verse 12, now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. And it should say, then Moses went. Man, I even made your mouth. You better go now. And Moses' response is in verse 13 and 14, but Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. Moses said, you've answered all my questions so well. I don't want to go. I just don't want to go. Send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. This is a really interesting phrase in Hebrew. The way that they say the Lord's anger burned actually means the Lord's nose got hot. That's what that actually translates to in Hebrew. So then the Lord's nose got hot. Well, if you think about when you're mad and you think about your nose getting hot, you'll see there's a correlation there, okay? Then the Lord's nose got hot against Moses. And he said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well, and he's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. I appreciate this verse so much. And the reason I appreciate it is because the Lord is so mad, but also still so loving. Even in the midst of his anger, even in the midst of Moses not following through, the Lord's like, okay, I've been watching your brother Aaron. He's on his way. What about him? What if you go with him? What the Lord could have said is, that's fine. I won't send you. I'll just send Aaron. He's on his way. But the Lord says instead, this is important, Moses. I want you to go. So what if we send Aaron with you? What if we send him with you? 16 and 17, he will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, check this out, and as if you were God to him. But take the staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. It's an interesting phrase. I'll send Aaron, I'll tell you what to say, Moses, you tell him what to say, and then he'll listen. Just like I wanted you to listen to me, and it just be the two of us, you will now be God in human form for Aaron to be able to communicate with. It's an interesting phrase because what God is saying is, Moses, I want you to stand as a human in place of God, and Aaron will listen to you as if you were me. And if you know how the story ends, and you know that Jesus comes to earth, it's almost a little bit of a call forward. This idea that there would be a man on this earth who would be God as people listen to him. You know, there's a little bit of a call forward to Jesus there, which I think is really interesting. But basically what God is doing is God is allowing Moses to communicate on his behalf to his brother Aaron. Well, Aaron and Moses meet up. Moses tells Aaron everything. Aaron says, let's do this. They end up back in Egypt. And in verse 29, it says this, Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and they worshiped. And they worshiped. There's just a few things I want you to see today from this text that I think will help us as we move forward. The first is this. If we put what we have in God's hands, we'll always have more than we realize. If we put what we have in God's hands, we will always have more than we realize. Why? Because in God's hands, things flourish. Things grow. Things become realized that God has in store for us. See, Moses is continuing to say, I'm not enough. Don't send me. Here are the reasons why I can't go. But if I'm honest with you, like I think that relates a lot to what we do, but we do it in reverse. And this is what I mean by that. The Lord called Moses. Moses said, not me. There's something inside of each and every one of us that whether or not anyone's ever told you, if you're a follower of Jesus, there's something in you that says, I know God wants to do something with me. I just don't know what it is. Like I know there's something here that the Lord wants to do. I just don't know what that means. There's a missional calling. I just don't know what. Okay? And at that point, once we realize that, we start coming up with all of our excuses why God can't use us. God can't use me. I'm an addict. God can't me. I cuss all the time. God can't use me. I smoke and I drink. God can't use me. I have issues with pornography. God can't use me. My marriage is a mess. God can't use me. I don't know the Bible. I don't know half the things in there. God can't use me. I get mad too easily. God can't use me. I don't have enough money. God can't use me. I'm kind of dumb. Like I know nobody else thinks that way, but that's what I think when I look at myself. God doesn't want to use me. I'm not even like attractive to look at. Like I just don't feel good about me in my own skin. Man, we have all these excuses why God can't use me. But here's what's different about us versus Moses. God said go, Moses said God can't use me. We say God can't use us before God ever sends us to anything. We've already determined on the front end as a believer that I know I have a missional calling and I know that God can't use me. So I'm just going to sit in a pew every Sunday. I'm going to face forward, look at this pastor. I'll read my Bible. I'll nod my head and I'll smile. It'll make me feel better about myself, but I'll go Monday through Saturday not being used by God. And I'll say, Lord, why aren't you using me? But here are all the reasons why you can't use me. See, we'll hold all that in our hand and we'll not get used by God. And whether you've been coming to church your whole life and you're 90 or 100 years old, or this is the first day you've ever stepped in here, if you're a follower of Jesus, God has a call on your life missionally into this community. And it may be small and feel insignificant. It may be huge. But God has this call, and here's what he's saying to you and me. Would you just let go of all the reasons why I can't use you? Will you let go of all of your talent, all of your skill, all of your excuses, all of your addiction? Would you just drop it in front of me and see what I do with it all? Because the craziest thing about God, and I don't understand this and I wish I could preach on it, but I can't because I don't understand it. The craziest thing about God is we hand him a puddle of mess. And he makes it beautiful. I don't understand that. I don't understand how I can give God all my ugly. And God makes it beautiful in his hands. Drop what's in your hand before the Lord. You'll never figure out what God has called you to. You'll never be sent if you don't let go of your staff and drop it right in front of God and say, what do you want to do with it? Because when I drop things in your hands, you make them come alive. If we put what we have in the hands of God, we'll always have more than we realize. The word for that is surrender. We got to surrender. Second thing I want you to see is that God sends people who feel like they don't have what it takes. God sends people who feel like they don't have what it takes every single time. Not sometimes. I've been pastoring for a long time now. I've worked with thousands of people. I've seen God move in the lives of people. I've seen God send people back into their community to do stuff. And in the midst of that, every single time, they are not qualified. Every single time. Amen. Because if you were qualified or I were qualified, we don't need God at all. Who cares if he goes with us if I can do it by myself? See, we need the Lord. We're unqualified. God uses unqualified people. So if you're in this room and you're thinking to yourself, man, God, I don't know what he would even do with me. I got nothing. You're exactly who he's looking for. And you're exactly the one he wants to speak to. The way they used to say it when I was younger in church is God qualifies the unqualified, right? Somehow because of him, we become qualified even though we have no business having it all together. The third thing is this: because God is our partner, we don't have to have it all figured out. Because God is our partner, we don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to have some master plan for the rest of our lives. We just have to be a yes in the room. We have to be willing to say yes to something and just see what God does with it, because God has asked us to. We don't have to have it all figured out, because guess what? He is with us and in front of us. He has it figured out. Just move. Just move forward. I am going to tell the story. I am going to tell the story. I wasn't going to tell it because I didn't want to embarrass anyone, but I'm going to tell it anyway. And if you're in the room and you know this story's about you, I'm not telling it to embarrass you. I'm telling it because I saw God move. Okay? All right. About 2.5 years ago, I used to meet with a guy every Tuesday night for dinner who goes to this church. And we met every Tuesday night at B-Dubs for dinner. Okay? Every Tuesday night. Late afternoon, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, every Tuesday night, we would meet at B-Dubs. And while we were meeting at B-Dubs, it seemed like for about 3 straight weeks in a row, we had the same waiter every time. And I started to pay attention to him. And I kid you not, strongly in my spirit, I heard the Lord say, pray for that man. Like in a deep, deep way, pray for him. And so I looked at his name tag, I wrote down his name. I'm not gonna tell you his name. I wrote down his name, and I've been praying for him for now 2.5 years, okay? After about another month or so, the guy I used to meet with said to me, why don't you tell him that you're praying for him? Like, tell him. And I said, I don't feel called to tell him, I just feel called to pray. So I'm just gonna pray. So I kept praying. I didn't even know what I was praying for. I would just say his name in my mind and just pray that the Lord would move in his life. I don't know. So fast forward to April of this past year, 2024. First of all, eventually he went to night shift and I never saw him again. I asked a couple times about him to the waitress that was waiting on us. They just said he became like a night shift person and a manager of some sort, and that he was no longer serving people during the day. Well, I continued to pray. And in April of 2024, I was at B-Dubs at night for the NFL draft with a bunch of people from the church. And we're at B-Dubs watching the draft, and I see him walk in and go sit up at the bar. And he wasn't working, he was just there. I think he was there to just talk to a few people and say, hey. And I knew that the Lord said, now he needs to know that you're praying for him. At that point, it'd been like 1.5 years of me praying for this dude every week and not seeing him or knowing why. This has cost me nothing. This was something very small that the Lord asked me to do. And so I got it from the table, I went over to the bar, and I put my hand on his shoulder, which I probably shouldn't have done because he doesn't know me. I put my hand on his shoulder and I went, hey. And he was like, hey. And I was like, you don't know me, but your name is, and I called him by his name, which is also extremely creepy. Just to be clear. Yeah, and he goes, okay. And I said, hey man, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but I've been praying for you for like 1.5 years. And I guess I just wanted you to know somebody's praying for you. And he said, thanks. And I said, is there anything specific I can pray for? And he said, I mean, it'd be cool if you prayed for my family. And I was like, I'll add them to my list. So in my notes app on my cell phone, I have his name, the word B-Dubs, and underneath it, it just says, and family. Because he asked me to pray for his family. So for since April, the last 10 months, 9 months, I've been praying for him and his family. I'll know nobody in his family. I don't even know him, truthfully. Just been praying. Well, 3-4 weeks ago, we had baptism. And I got out of here a little quick on Sunday morning so that I could go get changed for baptism and things like that. And all of a sudden, this man walks up to me in the lobby and he says, hey, do you know who I am? And I was like, and I called him by name and he just smiled. And I said, bro, I still pray for you. And he goes, yeah, my girlfriend invited me to church. And then all of a sudden, you got up there and I was like, I know that dude. Like, I know that guy. And I just smiled, and he started to tell me a little bit about his life. And then he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And he said, why didn't you tell me you were a pastor? And the whole reason I'm telling you this story is not to make myself look good. It's because this is what I need you, this is what I need you to hear. I didn't tell you I was a pastor because I wasn't praying for you because I was a pastor. Amen. Do you hear me? I wasn't praying for you because I was a pastor. And he was like, okay. And he just smiled at me. And he said, see you next Sunday. And I think that dude's been here almost every Sunday since. And listen, I don't know where he's at with Jesus. And he may actually be in the room right now. He could actually hear my voice right now, right? I'm the only one who knows if he's here and him. He may not even be in a relationship with Jesus yet for all I know. But let me tell you something, if you can hear my voice, the Lord called me to pray for you. And he called me to pray for you so that you could hear this. He sees you and he loves you. And he's calling you into a relationship with him. And there's a reason why I didn't walk up to you and say, hey, I'm Pastor Tim Riley from Connection Point Church. Do you know where that is? It's across the street from the high school. We have services at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. We'd love to see you. There's a reason why I didn't do that, because the Lord didn't ask me to invite you to church. The Lord is asking me to invite you into a relationship with him. Amen. And I'm just trying to be faithful to that, man, like just as a man, not even as a pastor. I'm trying to be sent. I'm trying to live a life where when the Lord asks me to do something, I just do it. And it's just the way I live. And so God is calling you into that relationship too. He's calling you into that. He's calling this entire congregation into that. What would it look like if we would just be people who are sent? People who, if God says to us, you got to go pray for that man and don't tell him, we go, cool, I can do that. I didn't know 2.5 years ago that you'd show up at my church. That was never the plan. The plan wasn't to get you here. The plan is to get you to Jesus because he can change your life, and I hope he's already doing it. So church family, this morning, we don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to know the plan. We just have to be people who say yes to God. Because when we say yes to him, he moves in front of us and with us, and we just need to do what we're told. We just need to do what we're told. And here's the honest truth. If I could be completely transparent, the Lord will ask me to do something 100 times and I probably do it 20 times. I'm not as faithful as I look. I don't have it all together because my first name is Pastor. I mean, here's the honest truth. I fail a lot at doing what Jesus asked me to do. But here's what I also know. When I say yes and I step into that, I grow and God does stuff. Stuff happens that I don't see until it happens. So what would it look like to be a congregation who took risks and who took chances and said yes when we felt like the Lord was moving, and when doors slammed in our face, we could look at the door and say, at least I was obedient. At least I moved in the direction he called me to. Come on, y'all, we gotta wake up. It's not about the rows that you're sitting in this morning. It's about the messiness of movement that happens in this community. If we would be a people who would say yes to every time the Lord asks us to do something, the city would change in ways we can't understand. And if you're like, well, I never know when the Lord's asking me to do something. I wanna know. I wanna know what the Lord wants me to do. I don't know. How did you know, Pastor Tim? Well, here's how I know. Because I spend every day of my life trying to be in control and then giving up control. Every day. I drop my staff every single day. You would think I would learn to drop my staff and keep it down there, but I pick it right back up because I want to be in control, and I've got really good plans for God if he'll just listen to me. So every day I practice living a life that's not in my control, and by doing that every day, the voice of the Lord has gotten louder and louder and louder in my life. And it wasn't like I woke up one day and I could hear him clearly, because some days I still can't hear him clearly. But when he looks at me and says, you're doing that, I don't even question it anymore because I've seen him move so many times. I want to step into the things God has for me. You don't have to have it all figured out because God does. We have a couple questions that we come up with every week that we call car conversations. Opportunities for people to have conversation on the way home. Here are the two this morning. The first is this. Why do you think God chose Moses when he knew Moses didn't speak well? It would have made a whole heck of a lot more sense for God to just choose a good speaker. He should have skipped Moses and just kept Aaron. Aaron's way better than Moses, right? But God looks at the messiness of Moses and says, I got you. I got you. You're doing this with me. Even if I end up using Aaron, guess what? Take your staff because you're still going and you're still going to do what I've asked you to do. In fact, Moses, I am upgrading you. I'm giving you a promotion. Now to Aaron, you are God. You'll speak to him like I speak to you. That's an upgrade for a guy who doesn't deserve it. Second question is this. What do you already have that you think God could use if you would just let him? What do you already have in your life? And you're like, I don't know how he'd use it. I don't even know how it would work, but I got this. Here, God. Do you want it? God, I give it to you. Do what you want with these things. Do what you want with me because you've created my mouth. You've created my hands. You've created my body. You've created everything around me, and you've created my ability to work. You've created my vocation. You've created any skills or talents that I have. Even if I think they're useless, you could use them. I'm really good at card tricks. I'm really good at magic tricks with cards. Just so you know, sometime I'll show you. And I started learning magic tricks when I was in high school because I'd get bored in class and the teacher didn't care if I had a deck of cards out, and I started learning how to do a little bit of magic, and I thought it was super fun. And you can really mess with people. I like messing with their brains, imagine that, right? And what are you gonna do with that? What's the plan with that, God? And I'll never forget the moment as a therapist that I was sitting in a counseling session. And I had a 13-year-old boy sitting across from me whose mom made him go to counseling because she and his dad were getting a divorce. And he sits on the couch in front of me, and I'm sitting in a chair. And I said, so what do you want to talk about? And he just looked at me. And I said, what's your name? And he just looked at me. And I said, well, bro, I'm getting paid whether you talk or not. So do you want to talk or do you want to just sit here? And he just looked at me. I said, I'd love to talk to you. And he just looked at me. And I said, no problem. And I sat there for a second and I looked over at my bookshelf. And on the very side of my bookshelf was a deck of cards. And I said, you know what? You just sit there, I'll do this. And I started doing some card tricks. And then this is what he said to me. How did you do that? And I said, I tell you what, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. We talk for 10 minutes about what's going on in your life. We'll spend the rest of the time learning a card trick. And he was like, cool. Me and that little dude became best friends over the course of a year. He would come in, he's like, I don't want card tricks today, I need to talk to you. And God took something that I thought was meaningless and gave it meaning in the middle of a moment that I thought it would never happen. Here's the truth. You don't know what you got. You don't know what you got. You don't know what little thing that means nothing to you is actually the very thing that unlocks someone else to find Jesus. And at the moment that you need it, the Lord will provide it if you'll just be faithful and pay attention. That's it. That's it. Bottom line this morning is this. Every follower of Jesus has a missional calling that is prepared for them by God. Seek it. Fear says freeze or run. When we overcome fear, we begin to seek it. Last week, I asked you to ask the question for the week. Lord, what is it that you may be calling me to? Lord, what are you sending me to? And I'm sure most of you didn't get an answer. What I would say this week is let's go a step further. Lord, I'm gonna begin to seek what you've called me to. I'm gonna begin to lay down control and hand it over to you because you have control. I hand it over to the goodness of God because he is that good and I am not. He's got control.